Chapter 10. The Story of Iron John, when the young man meets the king. "So what happened next in your story?" I asked the white buffalo.
As it comes to my story, remember my father was a nobleman who could be thought of as a king, and when a father is absent during the day, then returns home in the evening, his children receive only his temperament and not his teachings. If the father is working for a corporation, then what is to teach? He is reluctant to tell his sons what is really going on. The fragmentation of decision-making in corporate life, the massive effort that produces the corporate willingness to destroy the environment for the sake of profit, the prudence, even cowardice, that one learns in bureaucracy. Who wants to teach that? The longing for the father's blessing through teaching is still present, but children rarely receive that blessing. We have seen that the father as a living force in the home disappears when those forces of the demanding industry sent him on various railroads out into various villages. Enormous changes have appeared as of recently, and few of us, fathers or sons, are prepared for such vast change. But can we blame the father? He was only taught by his father, who was taught by his father. All these men were doing everything to make a living so the family could survive. We must stay curious about the father's journey, rather than purely criticize. And so if we look back to my story, as a young man, I was carried off with the wild man, then went down along with the wound of the damaged finger to the sacred water, and after 3 days my wound and hair had turned to gold. Then I descended again deeper, when I experienced ashes as I worked in the kitchen of the city's basement. There is a resemblance of Joseph, who went down to Egypt, and Job, who fell from a great height, and Huckleberry Finn, who went down the river. But the story is not finished, since nothing has been said about the second king of this new kingdom I had entered into. A great theme in fairy stories is the kings. Trouble happens with one's own father, who is the first king. After some suffering and isolation, then a second king somehow appears in the picture, finds the hero, and there often appears a task or duty the second king asks for. Then a complicated dance begins as the adventurer tries to establish a fruitful connection with the second king. We remember that as the young man in our story, I had no craft yet, and so I took the job in the kitchen. This kitchen happens to be the basement of the second castle where the second king is. Here I experienced the soot and ashes, even though I still retained the golden hair, while I wore a handkerchief over my head. After some time in the kitchen, the cook gave me an order to take food to the king, and so I remember it in this way. Once when it happened that no one else was at hand, the cook ordered me to carry the food to the royal table. But because I did not want my golden hair to be seen, I kept a red tarbouche over my head. Such a thing as a man covering his head had never happened in the king's presence, and so the king said, "When you come to the royal table, you must take your cap off." As a young man, I answered,
My lord, I cannot. I have a sore place on my head."
The king called up the cook, scolded him, and demanded to know how he could have taken such a person like me into his service, and so the cook was told to fire me and throw me out of the castle. The golden hair helps us to survive adolescence, but now it is more of an intrusion than a help. So I was being quite honest accurately when I said I had a sore on my head. Such hair is a taste of heaven, but we don't know what to do with it when we meet the second king. Whether to let it show and brag about it, or to hide it and be devious, it's that kind of sore. Everyone wants to be with the king. Women flock to the king in music, dance, sport, or men with money. The hunger for the father transmutes into the hunger for the king. But the story says that having golden hair doesn't give consent to remain in the king's chambers. Perhaps each of us has taken some sort of kitchen job, got acquainted with ashes, even endured a catabasis. But that doesn't mean we can have a long stay with the king. The guards let us in, then escort us out again. That is what my story says,
said the white buffalo. But I'm curious about a few questions. Why do we have so much hunger for the king? And why, in our 20s and 30s, are the visits with the king so short?
Each of us remembers from adolescent years the teachers on whom we had a crush for a while, the brief visit with celebrities, with concert artists, the embarrassing conversations with famous writers whom we go to for advice, if even in our dreams. If the king accepts us, we may find ourselves in an apprenticeship that we don't have the discipline to maintain. A woman who goes to the guru's chamber may discover, to her horror, that he wants to make love with her. Sometimes the king is genuine, and we say the wrong thing. We want praise and validation so badly that when we get confused and the wrong thing pops out, we retreat, hopelessly embarrassed. Other times, in our culture today, many of us go up the stairs even before the cook asks us to, and through alcohol, sex, or cocaine, extend the visit beyond what the moment allots for it. We could say that our entire culture is obsessed with trying to visit the king, but whomever visits before being called, or stays too long, falls back to the ashes. Singles bars, then, are fantastic alchemical ovens where attempts to fuse crude metals go on day after day and night after night. For whatever reason, visits to the king, when we are young, do not last long. The alchemists would say that even though we have done good ashes work, the soul is still contaminated with infantile angers, unrealistic hopes, and rage at our parents or at ourselves. Our spirit, when it is in the kitchen, assembles some sort of crude or mixed rock. Spirit, being clarified and single, cannot make a clear impression on this crude stuff until later. The king, by contrast, lives in his room high in the castle among air and sunlight, which suggests solar power and holy intellect. The king has arrived at unity. He is undistorted, unmingled as compared to the young man of ashes or the sooty girl, and he looks on matters differently. We should not be surprised how the visit in my story was short. As we close this chapter on the king and fathers, we recognize that we have hit something hard there. The sons and daughters in today's world still feel too little father, and that may not get any better. Fathers themselves have not changed so much, but rather they seem smaller to us because we do not see behind them or through them to see the king. When the mythological layer collapses and the political kings fall, then the patriarchy as a positive force is over. The sun and moon energies can no longer get down to earth. Ancient Celtic mythology has an image for the end of the patriarchy, and it is this. Eagles sit on top of the branches of the sacred tree, with dead animals underneath their claws. Rotting bits of flesh fall down through the branches to the ground beneath, where the swine eats them. We, as the people of the earth, are that swine. When all the meat that comes down from above is rotten, then neither the sons nor daughters receive the true meat. Women have been, and still are right in their complaints about the food they find upon the earth, but men are not well fed either. Naturally, everyone is dissatisfied, for neither men nor women are receiving the true meat. That doesn't imply that we need to build up the patriarchy again, but that we need to understand that we are starving. The more difficult it is to visit the king, the more hungry everyone is. The perceived absence of the father is actually the absence of the king. Addiction does not have to do with the Colombian drug lords, but with the absence of the king. Men and women have been separated from the king before. This separation has happened many times in past centuries, and so it will be interesting to go deeper into this story and to see what happens tomorrow,
said the white buffalo.